Hello, this is Chris Gray, your host with our new talk show, The Captain's Table. Back in the 1800s, when ships would sail on long voyages, the captain of the ship would invite passengers he considered to be the most interesting to sit at his table, which was elevated in the dining hall, and he would talk to them while the other passengers listened to the conversation. We are trying to bring that tradition back with our podcast. This was one of the original radio or podcast shows. Today, we're going to have some great conversations and have an interesting guest. His name is Harvey Englander. We're honored to have him. He's founder of one of the most successful political consulting, lobbying, and public relation firms in California and in the country. How you doing today, Harvey?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you for the warm introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm honored to have you. So, Harvey, you've had a long and brilliant career, especially in Southern California. Tell us how you got interested in politics.
Well, it actually started in high school. Or it actually started a little before that, because as a child, I remember my parents always talking about at least presidential races. I remember they were big Adlai Stevenson supporters, and I remember even in 1964, when I was 14, my mother walking precincts against a ballot proposition, no on Prop 14. And but in high school, I had a history teacher and a civics teacher who started getting me interested. And then this was in the spring of 1968 when I graduated Hamilton High School in Los Angeles, and would have been voted least likely to succeed had there been such a vote. I went to Los Angeles City College to further my education in the spring of 1968, and I had a political science professor named Phil Schlesinger, whose term project was get involved in a political campaign and write a paper about it. And I became a volunteer for Bobby Kennedy and worked in that campaign almost every day. They thought I had a little bit of talent. I went from being a motorcade driver to being a sort of mini advanced person. After Senator Kennedy was killed, which was in early June of 1968, and the semester was ending at LA City College, I had summer school again, and I had poli-sci 2 with the same professor. And Dr. Schlesinger took me under his wing, and he took 3 students every year to Sacramento over the summer. I was one of them, and he got me my first, what today we would call internship, but was then office boy job in the Humphrey for President campaign in 1968, working for the guy who ran the campaign at the time, Joe Sorrell. And that's how it all began. So tell me a little bit more about the Kennedy assassination. Were you present, and what was your perspective? I was with the mass of people at the Ambassador Hotel. I didn't have an assignment to do any driving that night, so I was hanging around with a bunch of other 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds, and heard the pops, and really didn't the screaming, and didn't know what to think, and was very frightened, as you can imagine, and spent the next week pretty much in a daze.
I can imagine. So after the Humphrey campaign, did you return to school, or did you start doing more campaigns?
Well, this is a funny story. At least for me, it's funny. My wife hates my telling it. But no, I stayed in school. I was at LA City College and got involved in student government, got elected to Councilman of Public Relations and student body vice president, and transferred. I was working for this company, then Sorrell Winter Associates, then became Sorrell Associates. And 1970 rolls around. I'm leaving LA City College, and I got accepted to go to college at Cal State Northridge. And remember, this is during the draft as well, and we had a lottery, and even though I had a fairly high number, you still had to be careful. And the firm I was working for, Joe Sorrell's firm, was going to run the campaign, or did run the campaign, for a gentleman named Julian Nava, who was on the LA Board of Education, who ran for state school superintendent, and that was the election where Wilson Miles eventually won. Max Rafferty was the incumbent. And in meeting Julian Nava, who was a professor at Cal State Northridge, I told him I was going to be enrolling there. and he really wanted me to work in his campaign. So I had Julian for 2 classes. I had 2 of his best friends for another 3 classes. And I ended up having 15 units of college at Cal State Northridge. I think I went to class 2 or 3 times. And I got straight A's that semester.
Wonder why.
And that enabled me to transfer to UCLA.
Boo.
And so I was working at Sorrel 2 or 3 days a week, pretty much every day, but I would go to classes more often because after all, it was UCLA. But my political education helped me at UCLA. Transferring in as a junior at UCLA, parking would have been at a lot that's all the way out at probably a mile from campus, and then having to take a shuttle to class. Well, I couldn't do that. I was working for a living. I had to run campaigns and do other things. So one of the firm's clients was State Senator Al Alquist from Santa Clara County. And Al was chairman or vice chairman of, I think, the Senate Education Committee. He wrote a letter for me for the parking service at UCLA saying that I was doing important research for him and that he would greatly appreciate if they would give me a parking space in a lot close to the library.
Okay.
So I brought this letter to the parking service at UCLA, and they allowed me to buy a parking spot in Lot 5, which was faculty parking next to the library on the North Campus.
I wish he could have done that for me when I was at Cal.
Well, it's the things you learn in politics. And again, I look back and say, am I proud of what I did? Well, yes and no.
It's quite an education, though. So,
absolutely. The best education in the world is what we do in political campaigns.
Yes, I agree. In fact, I always tell people that I got my degree in political science, so I learned the theory, and then I went directly onto the streets and learned the campaigns from the bottom up. And then I was chief of staff for 27 years, so I kind of learned the policy and the implementation part. So it gives you kind of a well-rounded look at politics. I think a little better than people that have only worked on one of the 3 areas.
You absolutely have a better education than I did. One of my failures as a public affairs and personal lobbyist is never having worked inside of government. Had I done that when I had an opportunity, I think I would have had an even more interesting and even more successful career than I've had. I should also point out that my education wasn't done in the spring of 1972, my last quarter at UCLA before graduating. I spent 7 of those 9 weeks traveling with Hubert Humphrey in the 72 presidential primaries and had cut deals with my professors to write term projects, to write papers about my experiences. And that's how I finally graduated college.
Oh, that's great. I did some internships politically too, but nothing to that degree. So after college, you were still working for the same political company?
I was. I worked for them until I started as the office boy, and I left in 1977 as the senior vice president when I was 27 years of age, and took a year out of politics. And I became the public relations director of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, which is a fascinating and important organization in what they do. It just wasn't a good fit for me because, as you well know, coming from politics, staff people are high up on the food chain.
Yes.
And in many nonprofits, staff people aren't high up on the food chain because you've got your lay leadership who have who do a lot of the work and get a lot of the credit and raise all the money. So I was actually I was the public relations director. I was the youngest executive of the Jewish Federation, which is a huge organization. Youngest member of the executive staff. And I'd gotten married and used a public relations director's mission, as we called it, to Poland, Romania, and Israel as our honeymoon. I'm one of the very few people who can say that they honeymooned at Auschwitz. But
wow.
It was a spectacular learning trip for me. This was the spring. This was late June of 1978. And I'm having dinner. We're having dinner with the editor of a newspaper called Haaretz in Israel. And I'll always remember the editor's name, Hannah Zemmer, when a waiter comes in and asks if I'm in the room. There's a telephone call for me from the United States. This is long before cell phones, obviously. My first thought was something with my family. What was the problem? And I went downstairs to the phone room, and it was a gentleman named Bill Butcher and his partner Arnold Ford, and who I'd known Democratic politics that they had done in Orange County. Bill Butcher's brother-in-law was Ken Corey, who was then state controller, Democrat. Yep. And they had just run the Proposition 13 campaign. Most people don't know that Prop 13's campaign consultants were Democrats, or at least grew up as Democrats, worked as Democrats up until 1978.
I'm very surprised, but I think people might not all know, especially if they're not old enough, that Prop 13 was an initiative with Jarvis Gann being the highlight proponents,
right.
That limited the amount of property taxes. The rate increases.
Right. What it did is it reduced property tax. Property taxes had gone up tremendously over the years, and there had been no real attempt to reform them. And I remember as a child, even though I'm a moderate to liberal Democrat, my mother always being concerned every year as a widow who, had essentially a blue collar job, that every year when the property tax bill would come, she'd be concerned that someone nearby had sold their house, which meant our property taxes were going up. So I've always had this feeling that, knowledge that there was something wrong with our property tax system. Proposition 13 came along with Jarvis Gann. What it did was it brought back property taxes to a level a few years before 1978. It set property taxes at 1% of the assessed or sale value of a house. And it only allowed an increase of 2% a year plus bonded indebtedness. And what that did, but it did it for all property, residential and commercial. I now, looking back, think it should have been a split roll, but it is what it is. Anyway, Bill and Arnold had run the Jarvis Gann initiative, Prop 13. It was very successful. And they were building a national organization, and they wanted me to run the media relations and come up with the creative earned media for the operation. And I said, but, I'm a Democrat. They reminded me that they were Democrats, but they'd known about me. We knew each other slightly, and they'd known me about my reputation in campaigns and with earned media opportunities. And I was not all that happy, as I said, at the Jewish Federation. It was a challenging place for me to work from where I came from. And they made me literally the offer that I could not refuse. So I came back to Los Angeles after the trip. I repaid the Jewish Federation for the cost of the trip. And my wife and I then moved to Irvine, and I ran the Howard Jarvis operation for about 2.5 years.
Wow. That completely changed the culture. One of the behind-the-scenes stories I can tell you as a former county employee, because I came in after Prop 13, but the counties were still adjusting, let us say, after the large cut in revenue. And I asked them, how did the system work before? And they said, we would just come up with all the programs we wanted to do that we thought were essential, and we would come up with that as the expense side. And on the revenue side, we would just adjust the property roll, increase it to the point where it would pay for those programs, that we would have a balanced budget. And so I said, well, maybe that's why people kind of revolted and decided they didn't want that. And I said, well, what if people didn't like their property taxes? Well, as most people know, you can appeal your property tax assessment. But back then, the Board of Supervisors actually sat as the hearing officers. And they told me every vote was 4-1. And I said, 4-1? Why would all the votes be 4-1? They said the supervisor that represented your district would always vote with you. And the other 4 would always vote to keep the property tax the way it was. So literally almost no one ever won a property tax appeal, at least in Alameda County.
Right.
And these stories come directly from the county supervisors.
Yeah, it was an unfair system. As I said, if someone down the street, if your next door neighbor sold their house, your property taxes would go up.
Yep.
And that was just wrong. So for better or for worse, Prop 13 brought some honesty to the system. Now, again, looking back, what I believe is it should have been a split role, that commercial property should have, changed. Commercial property doesn't change hands as often as residential property. There are a lot of things, and some of these things have been fixed, and some of these things are still out there. But it also forced a lot of government, particularly county government, to live within a budget.
Yes.
Didn't have as much effect on it affected schools, it affected county government, it affected state government, didn't affect city government as much because city government doesn't get a lot of property tax revenue. I
agree. So after Jarvis Gann and Proposition 13, did you transition further into Democratic politics, or?
Yeah, I came back home. I was never comfortable on the conservative side of things. I met some really good Republicans, people who made good friends over the years. But in terms of the core values that I believed in, things like choice, things like personal responsibility, gun control, those kinds of things, and helping the less fortunate, providing more funding for public education. Those are things that I was familiar with. And primarily, I then ran political campaigns primarily for Democrats, though I did two, and I would run Republican campaigns in nonpartisan races like county supervisor. But there were 2 or 3 Republican partisan races that I'm very proud of having run. One of that, and I would only run Republican partisan races in districts that were Republican districts. And so, for example, I'm proud of having run Paul Horcher's campaign for state assembly as a Republican because he was a pro-choice trial lawyer. And he won. I was very proud of running Marilyn Brewer's campaign for Newport Beach for state assembly, which she won because she was a pro-choice Republican. And she didn't vote probably any other way on issues I cared about, but she was pro-choice, and that's the way she voted. Same with Paul Horcher. Paul Horcher was also a trial lawyer, so he voted on a lot of things that I thought was important in terms of consumer protection. And I worked for some wonderful partisan Republicans. One of my closest friends, Don Kanabe, was a county supervisor here in Los Angeles for 20 years. He married my current wife and I. His son, Matt, is the Kanabe in the firm Englander, Kanabe and Allen that I founded. And, is the kind of Republican that I wish served in elective office in Congress today.
Yeah, back when I started and during a lot of the years you just mentioned candidates were elected in, there wasn't as much polarization in my view, and they didn't try to dehumanize their the opposing party to the degree because they would try to find issues they could work on in common. They would have friends on both sides of the aisle. And I think it was more statesmanlike. And I think I'd like to get your opinion on what happened to the point where we're at today, where it's one side or the other, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of working together.
Well, I think a lot of it started in 1978, actually, here in California when Ross Johnson got elected. He was a client of my firm when I was working for Butcher Ford. I think he started to see this polarization occurring when Reagan became president in 1980. You saw different kind of Republican get elected. It used to be Democrats and Republicans were elected. They were elected to make government work better. Now, they had a different idea of how government should work, but there was agreement that government should work.
Yes.
There were different sets of priorities, but they would come together. They would find a way to come together. Well, on a national level and somewhat of a local level, that changed in the late 1970s, early 1980s. It sort of became, out of Washington, it crystallized with Newt Gingrich and a Contract for America. And it also changed around the time of Gingrich and his cohorts when Democrats and Republicans stopped socializing together. What occurred in the 1980s, began in the 1980s in Washington, D.C., was there was such hatred for being in Washington that Republicans would get elected to Congress, the House of Representatives, and instead of moving their family to Washington or getting an apartment or buying a condo or something with other members of Congress or even staff people, Republican members started living in their offices. It's a true story. Many of them still do today.
Wow.
They use the house gym to shower and exercise. They don't socialize with Democrats. The wives don't get together. I won't say wives. The spouses don't get together for dinner. There is not the collegiality that there used to be. And, you can't make a deal with someone you don't know and don't trust.
Exactly.
And I believe that this Republican penchant for hating Washington, hating government, has permeated all the way down from D.C. to the local level.
I can see that. I do think, though, that the preponderance of social media and the politicization of the news information, where people grab a hold of networks to basically speak to supporters instead of trying to do general non-biased news. Not that it was always completely non-biased, but some people used to make an attempt at it. I think has really influenced things because people only listen to the people that agree with them. And I think that's increased the polarization even more than what you were mentioning before.
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So tell me how you made this transition from working on campaigns to the successful political lobbyist and public relations firm that you've developed.
Well, over the years, from time to time, special interests, starting probably with the cable TV industry when we had cable TV franchising, probably my first clients now that I think about it. Because I would know some of the elected officials and members of their staff, companies, special interests, and special interests are not negative because, my God, Sierra Club's a special interest, and NWPC is a special interest, and I don't have a pejorative when I say special interest, but everybody is a special interest organization. Came to me to lobby on behalf of their interests. And I started doing that, and right around the same time, some law firms contacted me and asked me about crisis management, because they, after all, isn't a political campaign just a months-long crisis management program. Mm-hmm. And it interested me and was fascinating to me. And I started doing more and more of that, and came the realization that I could no longer continue to run candidate campaigns and be through lobbying and public affairs, consulting work, and crisis litigation was sort of off the side. Didn't have a political overture per se, but I could no longer run. I couldn't run a campaign for city council, lose, and then expect that office is going to be particularly amenable to me coming in and asking for a vote.
Well, I admire you for making that distinction, because many of the other political consultants who also do lobbying, don't make the distinction because it's basically would lose half their business.
Well, I did that and realized that I had to make a choice, and also there was something more appealing to me, having more of a 9 to 5, or working a 12-hour day rather than a 20-hour day, and working 5 days a week rather than 7 days a week, on behalf of corporate interests. So I pretty much referred out anybody who came to me for candidate races. For friends of mine, I continue to run re-election campaigns for people who were clients, or if they were moving to a different office. But I just didn't accept any more candidate work. I continued to do issues work. And I also became more interested in federal races and Senate races and raising money for those people and helping get people elected who I liked to the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. Also, I realized that to do this successfully, I had to have a firm. It wasn't just me. Whereas, running political campaigns, you've got support staff, but pretty much anybody who hired me. So, right. When I left Butcher Ford, I continued to run campaigns. This was in 1981. And by the mid-1990s, I decided I needed to change things. So by that time, I'd pretty much gotten out of the campaign business. And in 1994, I merged my firm with a Washington, D.C. public affairs firm, the Camber Group, who was very active in democratic work around the country, very active in labor work on behalf of labor unions. And there was a real blend. A great simpatico allowed me to work on some bigger issues around the country, gave them a New York, Washington, D.C., which was main office, and now California presence, and helped clients out here that were the firm's clients. And for a couple of years, that was spectacular. Unfortunately, the senior vice president who brought me into the firm had a tragic accident, and the firm was never the same. And in 1999, I bought my company back from them. Interestingly enough, and I announced the reopening of my firm under my name, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly enough, I get a call from a headhunter about a month later asking me if I'd be interested in the job. And, I never say no to anything. My default answer to most things is yes. So sure, because how am I going to learn about it if I don't say yes? He told me what it was, and I said, I don't really have an interest in going to work for this company after I'd researched it, but I have an interest in them buying me or us merging together. And they were a top 15 independent PR firm in the country called MWW out of East Rutherford, New Jersey. And I had some meetings. They flew out to L.A. I flew back to New Jersey. And in 1999, just a few months after I'd bought my company back from the Camber Group, they bought my company. And we remained the Englander Group, a division of MWW, because they didn't have a name in California, and I ran their California operations. And I did this for a couple of reasons, obviously financial, but it expanded my reach again, which I liked, provided me working on interesting projects, which I liked. But I knew that they either had to go public or be bought by a public company. That was their next corporate objective. And I realized there was financial benefits for me if that were to occur, obviously for my family and for my employees. And in 2000, MWW was purchased by the Interpublic group of companies, and I had a very nice financial package with them, and I continued to run California for them. My office kept growing and was very successful. In fact, we were the highest grossing per capita per employee office in the MWW group. We weren't the biggest office by far because I only had 5 or 6 people, but we billed more per person than any of the other offices.
Wow.
I had a 5-year earn-out period and it was fast approaching 2005. MWW wanted me to stay. I'm not a corporate guy. I'm pretty entrepreneurial. And I had a pretty good income, and I saved some money, and my wife is a successful land use lawyer. And I decided in 2005 that I didn't want to do this anymore at MWW. And when my earnout ended on March 15th of 2005, on March 16th, I opened up I reopened the Englander Group with 5 clients, 2 clients. I wasn't the next day, I say a few weeks later. I had a couple of clients who'd been my clients for 10 or 15 years who were going to go with me wherever they wanted. And I had 3 other people who wanted to hire me and just waited for me to be on my own because they didn't want me to be as part of a big firm. So I started the Englander Group. I rented some office space from a friend of mine above the Palm Restaurant in downtown LA, and it was my assistant, myself, my 5 clients, and I was very happy. I was making a nice income off the 5 clients, and I was doing the amount of work I wanted to do. Unfortunately, that's not true. Fortunately, word got out there. I put out a news release that I'd reopened the company and whatever, and a lot of that. 90 days later, I had 14 clients.
Sometimes small is better.
It was still my assistant and me. In fact, my assistant was leaving because there was too much work. She did not what she signed up for. And I went down to, we had a place at the beach at the time, a vacation home. And I went down we went down there for a week, and I said, what am I going to do? I decided to write a little business plan, which I'd never written before in my life. And it was a really simple business plan. It had a couple of tenets. Number one, like a 3, I wanted to do great work. I wanted to have people around me who were happy, and I wanted to be successful. Those are the easy things. But I realized that I wanted to run a different kind of agency. In a law firm, an accounting firm, and a PR firm, and all the service firms, they all operate on a pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid is you're just out of college, you're an intern, and then you're an account coordinator, and then an account executive, then a senior account executive, then a vice president, then a senior vice, and you're working up this pyramid. And let's face it, most of the work is done by the people who are in the middle of the pyramid or at the bottom of the pyramid.
Yep.
Because the people at the top, they're overseeing work, they're getting business, they're doing those kinds of things, they're being creative. And I go, I want to run a different kind of a company. I only want to have senior people. I'm only going to recruit senior people. I'm going to pay them more than they thought they could ever earn. I'm going to give them spectacular benefits. I'm going to make it so this is the only place anybody would ever want to work. At the same time, I'm going to charge my clients top dollar because we're not a price. If someone's hiring us based on price, they're not going to be hiring us because we are a value proposition, not a price proposition. And I told many prospective clients, if you're basing this on price, I will refer you to people who are a lot cheaper than we are. If that's what you're looking for, we're not going to be that person, that firm. So after spending the week at the beach, which, by the way, I picked up 5 more clients while I was supposedly on vacation planning and being with my wife and family. And I had 19 clients, and I came back to LA and made my first job offer to Matt Kanabe, who had been an employee of mine. When he got at Pepperdine University, he came to work for me. Then he went to work for his dad for 8 years, who was county supervisor. Then he came back to work for me at MWW. He was the first person I hired. Eric Rose was the second person I hired, who I'd known when he worked at LA City Hall. And I hired people. I went after people for their expertise in relationships and their integrity. When I decided to open the aviation division, I hired the guy who was the director of communications for LA World Airports. really needed someone who understood the city and the county and budgets and all those kinds of things. And Marcus Allen, the UCLA Marcus Allen, not the SC football player Marcus Allen, came to mind, and I brought Marcus in. And everybody who worked for me, spectacular salaries, spectacular benefits, lots of bonuses for bringing business in. And that's what grew. Hiring the best people, and charging my clients top dollar because they were getting the best in the business. And the firm grew very rapidly. Within 5 years, we were the largest public affairs lobbying firm in Los Angeles, according to the LA Business Journal. And
that's remarkable.
Kept growing. A few years into it, my oldest son, who was an attorney, was going to be named the youngest partner in a large law firm. Came to me. He was 30 years old. He was 29. He was almost 30. And said, "Dad, I'm going to turn down the partnership law firm, and I want to come to work in the family business." And he did, and it started out as general counsel and then vice president, and senior vice president, general counsel, and executive VP, general counsel. And when I retired from the firm officially 3 or 4 years ago, he became a partner. So there's still an Englander as a partner, and Englander, Kanabi, and Allen. And obviously Matt Kanabi's a partner, Marcus Allen's a partner, Eric Rose is a partner, Jeff McConnell's a partner, Alex Charon's a partner. There are one or two others since I've left who've joined the firm as well. And I keep my hand in. I have 3 or 4 clients that I've worked with for years, doing the kind of strategic communications consulting, crisis management, a little bit of public affairs and lobbying to keep my hand in and make sure that it doesn't interfere too much with my golf game.
So that is incredible that you built a firm based on knowledgeable people with integrity and relationships. And since those are such valuable commodities, you're able to charge top dollar and compensate your employees or your partners appropriately.
Yeah, I mean, the firm has had I can only think of one professional. There are a couple of professionals who left to start their own firms, which is very supportive, mostly running political campaigns, and I've sent them referrals and I've wrote for them. I can only think of one other executive or one other professional who left, who went to one of our clients, came to us and said, "We really want to hire her as director of PR, director of communications," and there was no way we would ever stand in her way to do that. Other than that, the firm has been extraordinarily stable in its professional and administrative staff, but particularly the professional staff. There are people like Matt Kanabi, Marcus Allen, Eric Rose, who've been there since the first year or two that we opened.
Well, you would expect loyalty if you build a firm in that fashion. One of the things I wanted to go back to that I was really interested in was when you were talking about special interest, and how you represented special interest. And you're one of the few people who embrace that term. Usually when people in politics, especially, say special interest, they basically mean you represent the people we don't like on the other side. And those are special interest. And the people that like us are public interest or human interest or whatever, some other definition. But basically everybody, supporters, try to push for their own self-interest, whatever that be, labor unions, businesses, nonprofits. It really doesn't make a difference. Everybody promotes their best, their self-interest because those are things they care about.
As well they should. Now, I made the decision from the very beginning of who I would represent and who I would not represent. I would not represent tobacco. I would not represent guns. I would not represent any special interest that had an anti-choice agenda. So I could turn that business down, and I did turn some of that business down. I turned down Donald Trump as a client.
Let us know about that.
Well, okay. So Trump bought the Ambassador Hotel, and I was one of the people who was referred to him to represent him for the entitlement work. And so I met with him, and this is like 30 years ago. I didn't really know who Trump was 30, 35 years ago. But I met with him, and he was an accomplished guy, really only known for doing the Grand Hyatt, New York in those days. And it was an interesting plan for the ambassador, sort of heartfelt from me, having been there with Bobby. But he wanted a proposal, and I said, okay. And then I called a couple of guys I knew in New York, because I'm doing my due diligence. Tell me about this guy, Trump. And they said, well, here's the story. You have to use his contract form, which is onerous. And what he'll do is he'll pay you on time first few months. Then he'll pay you slow pay the next few months. Then he won't pay you, and because of what's in his contract form, if you threaten to quit, he will sue you. So I heard this from two people, friends in New York.
It seems consistent.
I wrote Trump a letter. I said, I started working on a proposal for you, but I really thought about this. And, mine's a really new firm, and you need so much work. I just don't think I can't afford to take you as a client because you would take up all my time, and that's not the way I can build a firm. I wish you the best of luck. That was my one brush with Donald Trump, and thrilled that I told him no, and thrilled that I never heard from him again, and vomit every time I hear his voice now.
So one other thing you touched briefly on, and I'd like you to explain to the listeners the difference between running a candidate for local office compared to state office compared to federal office. Because there's big differences, as people think all campaigns are the same, and some of the basics are and the fundamentals are, but there's different factors at every level.
Well, first of all, you start with that you don't have the money in local offices that you have in state, federal campaigns. Really, what you have to do, what I always found is, the fundamentals of the campaign were very strong for me. I was a great believer in field operations, great believer in direct mail, great believer in targeted communications, TV, cable TV. I was one of the first people to buy cable TV ads for clients. But really, it starts all with fundamental research. I'm a great believer in polls. Though I don't do many polls anymore, I do many more focus groups than I do polling, because people's attitudes have changed about the telephone polls. But really, it's understanding who your vote is and how do you get your vote to actually vote, and that has changed dramatically over the years. I remember when Republicans were the masters of absentee balloting, and they would always beat us because they got to do the absentee balloting, and Democrats didn't know how to do it. So times have obviously changed on that.
Yep. Now they're the ones who think absentee ballots illegal.
Right. But I learned to do absentee ballot campaigns by the genius of the Republicans who I got to know. And watching their campaigns and being on the other side of their campaigns. So I think while there are differences in, obviously, with issues, look, a statewide campaign, you're not relying on a field operation is based upon what is going on the ground locally and the issues locally. Statewide campaign is not going to have an effective ground operation unless they're tied into local campaigns. Statewide campaign is all media. It's earned media. It's paid media. Direct mail is not as important. I don't think direct mail is as important today as it used to be. We have social media now. And honestly, I haven't kept up in the last 6 to 10 years on all of the new political campaign, the social media aspects of it, things like that. I'm still an old direct mail guy. I'm still an old, boots on the ground guy, do TV. I'm not the guy to talk to about campaigns anymore because I don't follow them as much. And when I've done some independent expenditure work, things like that, I've relied on the consultants who I've worked with, including my son Adam, to put that together. I'm still a good writer. I'm still great at messaging, but I'm not a day-to-day campaign guy anymore. I wouldn't hire me to be a consultant in a campaign.
No, things have changed, especially with the social media and the different ways to communicate effectively. But messaging, I think, is still important no matter what form of delivery that you use.
It's critical.
Exactly. And that's what I was brought up on as well. So what are your interests today now that you've retired from your firm? Are you still active in politics?
I am in a different way. I'm supporting a number of candidates for Congress. I believe Democrats have to win Congress back, and I'm supportive of candidates. I raise money, do a little bit of independent expenditure work, doing fundraising for a Senate candidate here in California, for a couple of congressional candidates here in California. I give money to races and raise some money to races around the country. I particularly focus on seats that are in play. I've got some friends in Congress who I always will give money to, the Ted Lieu's and people like that. But mostly I raise money and do fundraising for seats that are in play, usually a Republican seat, like the 5 seats in New York, what was, Katie Porter's seat in Orange County, taking Garcia out in Santa Clarita. I focus on that. I focus on raising money in Senate races to hold the Senate, because that's particularly critical, as we see in these judicial nominations. So I do those kinds of things. A few people call on me for advice. A candidate running for Congress I support, we had lunch a few weeks ago, and I came up with an idea that was actually based upon a 1974 campaign that I was involved with. And the theme of that campaign was the man the oil companies fear the most. And that's helped elect Ken Corey state controller. Well, this candidate running for Congress, who's got a great track record in other offices, is the man that the anti-choicers fear the most, the candidate that the gun lobby fears the most, things like that. I think that's what will separate this candidate out from the other Democrats running in a Democratic seat.
Yeah, you have to find ways to differentiate.
Right. I think it's absolutely critical that, in a Democratic primary, Republican primary, these candidates, there isn't going to be a 2 or 3% difference in how they would vote or what they would say about any issues. It's what their effectiveness is going to be in getting their points across and being able to differentiate themselves in primary. So I'm helping some friends do that. I'm not doing that on a professional level. My wife and I travel. We play golf. We have now 5 grandchildren.
Congratulations.
We have, thank you, 2 of our sons. My son, who's a partner in my old firm, and my second son, who has worked for elected officials, and he's been a lobbyist. So we like to keep these things. And his wife is senior vice president of government relations for a big corporation. So we always have interesting table talk. My other 2 sons, one of them is a senior trademark counsel at one of the biggest internet companies. One of them is in finance, and he helps keep our finances, keeps us living our lifestyle, because he went to Wharton and also played football. He was a star field goal kicker at Wharton. Has a couple of Ivy League championship rings that he never wears because they're so big and bulky. So I'm just a typical grandpa. My 2 oldest grandsons are phenomenal baseball players at ages of 12 and 9. 12-year-olds already being recruited by some of the best high schools in California to play baseball for them. So I just I'm enjoying life as best as I can, and staying active in the world of politics. Because I think that once you stop completely working, it's easy to just get lost, and I don't want to be lost.
No, I agree. Well, I want to thank you. We've had a great interview.
Thank you.
Harvey Englander has been our guest, and he has impacted the people in California especially for many years, and we got a chance to learn from him today. And I appreciate it here on the Captain's Corner. And I really do appreciate you sitting down with us. So,
thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Okay.
Take care.
Yes, go on Facebook and you can find the Captain's Corner there and find our other podcasts. Thank you.